People keep saying to not be attached, to be free of attachment. But they don't talk about why is there an attachment in the first place? What is actually attached? People don't talk about this because not a lot of people have actually gone into the depths of what attachment is. And not just say let go and just be free of attachments. When a person is not aware of the mind, what usually happens is when they hear that to not be attached, they take it in a very negative way. In a negative way, as in to go to an extreme and just not do that something that is keeping them attached, or just not be with that person that they are so attached to. And this is extremism. I want to go into the roots of what attachment is, the depths of it, the actual birth of what attachment is, and how the attachment has risen inside us, inside each of us. If you look at your own life and look at the people that you're so close to, those are the people who you are attached with. A stranger, you'll not be attached to a stranger because you don't know much about that person. If it is just a person who is walking on the street and you just pass by that person, you're not attached to that person. Have you ever asked why? That's because attachment happens between two people who are close to each other, and that's why there's a bond between those two people. Now, if you look at the relationship that you have with a stranger, um, I know this is the opposite of attachment, but you look at the relationship that you have with a stranger, that relationship does not exist as in you have no information about that person, you have no common grounds with that person, you have nothing to be attached with that person. Which means what? The people that you're really close to are your parents, your family members, your friends, the people who you work with, and the people you hold important in your head. Uh, these are the only people, and definitely if you have pets, it would be your dogs, your cats, your birds, or any other animal. And we have come to a point where now people get attached to even things and not just living beings. I've seen people where they are attached to dolls, even adults. And now the technology is so advanced that people are attached to their laptops, to their headphones, to all the materialistic things, to their house, to their furnitures, to all the belongings of the past, because they don't really know how to be free of things, how to really let go. Letting go just doesn't mean you just throw it out. You just throw a person out of your life. You just throw a thing and burn it. That's really not letting go. That's like forcing it out of your life, but you're really not free of it. So to be actually be free means to not have that attachment. Now, coming back to why is there an attachment in the first place? Think about your parents. Ever since you're born, you have that kind of attachment to your parents, and it's very logical, it's very human to be, and even it's logical to be attached to something that has given birth to you, especially the mother. Now, if you look at your own parents, if you look at why you're attached to them, if you're like 20, 30 years old, even 50, 60, doesn't matter. There is a bundle of memories that you have about that particular parent, and you have different memories about your mother and your father. You have different experiences with your mother and your father, and you have an experience that is you, and you have an experience of you, your experience that you have with your mother, your experience that you have with your father. Now, in between these three, there is also a exchange that happens. Exchange as in you tend to have an overlap about what you think you are and what your parents have made you think you are. There's a huge difference in that because there's always a clash between who we feel we are and what our parents have made us want to, because it is a projection of their particular understanding of life, their particular understanding of what being human is. That's really not the truth because it's just a projection of what their psychology is, of what they have understood about what life is about. Now, going to the roots of what the attachment is, where do you think all this started? It really begins at the level of thought. When you have a breakup, for example, and you have a really difficult time to be free of that person because you're going through all the emotions, and why you're going through all those intense emotions is because you have a lot of attachment with those thoughts and your emotions and your feelings with that particular person. But the amazing part about all that is it's all your memory. It has got nothing to do with the other person. You had your your parent or your partner, doesn't matter, and this is you. You have a memory about them, but it is always you. It's always this person who has the memory of the other person. It's not that there's an overlap of the mind or the memories over here. You have a individual identity of your own, which comes because you have a very distinct, individualistic experiences of life. That's you. And this is another person. Now, what happens is this person thinks that it is only because of this person that he has those memories. So, when this particular partner goes away, he feels alone because he misses that particular memory that he had with that person. Now he remembers that memory which he had with the person. Now he wants that future which he had with that person. But this guy doesn't realize that it is all his memories. It's his memories that is troubling him. It is his unawareness of what a memory is that is troubling him. If he understands, if he goes to the depth of what a memory is, he will see that when he is remembering something, he's it actually begins with the thought, with one thought. A series of thoughts gives rise to the memories that he had in the past. It it could just take one thought for the person to remember what he had in the past. So if you look at it, one thought is the a single thought is the root of all remembrances, is the root of remembering all the memories of the past, a single thought. And the problem is not that this person can go to his past and access that information so that he can grow, so that he doesn't make the same mistakes. The problem is that he has identified himself with that particular uh, information, that particular memory of his past, and now he has an identity of who he is in connection with that particular memory or thought. Now, thought is a very strange thing because when you try to understand it, the thought itself will tell you what thought is. Now, that's not actually an insight. That's again coming out of the mind itself, out of what thought itself thinks it is. Because when you try to reason in your head, right, it is again the thought that is reasoning about itself. So the only way that a human being can ever realize what the thought is by observing it, by deeply seeing, by deeply paying attention to what one thought is. And this gives that clarity about what thought itself is. And at the root of all, thought is just a sound. Just as you hear the sound on the outside, on the inside, the only sound that you have is of the thought. And this will take a lot of time for people to understand that it is the thought that has kept a person attached to anything and everything in their life. Because it is that thought that keeps repeating itself in a loop so that it solidifies that particular information as an identity with you. This is very crucial to understand because not a lot of people live with depth, and it's a very superficial information that a whole lot of people give about what thinking is. Usually you get information as to slow down your thoughts, or look at your thoughts, or write down your thoughts, or just don't think. But these are really very superficial because they do not solve the problem at the root level of you understanding and you actually becoming aware of what a thought is, what your own thought is. Forget about everybody else's of what they are talking about, because what they talk about is their own set of identities, their own set of unawareness of what mind itself is. So you can never really understand what your thought is, what the thought that generates in your head is, by listening to another person. It is completely and has to be your own observation. It's only by observing your own mind, observing your own thoughts, that you'll come to the realization of what thinking is. It can never be done by watching a video, it can never be done by writing it down. It is only by pure observation of it, without any interpretation. Just look at it, bluntly look at it, as if it doesn't mean anything to you. Even if the thought is telling you the worst kind of things, the best kind of things, it really doesn't matter because thought is just a thought. It is a sound. And when you look at your thought without being identified with it, that's when you begin to see its originality. That's when you begin to see the actuality of what a thought is. And that's when you'll see that the thought really, really does anything and everything to keep that identity that you have built over the period of your life. It's something that's hardwired into the mind where the thinking is supposed to be a repetitive thing. It just keeps repeating on and on and on so that the identities are just kept alive. It's really hard to get it if you're unaware. Even a single thought, just one thought, is enough to keep you in that attachment. But and if you see, if you keep observing your mind, you'll see that it just goes on repeating n number of thoughts. There are so many patterns to it. Even the good thoughts, the bad thoughts, the worst thoughts, it is just to keep creating those identities again and again and again. It is not that, for example, if you went to college and you're a student, and you got back into you got into a work, you got into the job section, and now you have a position at a particular company. That does not mean that the thought, your thinking has lost that essence of being a student, that identity of being a student. If you're a fresher now, and even when you're like way into your work for decades also, it will not lose that identity of being a student. And now it has an identity of being a professional. Now it has the identity of being an employee, whatever work that you do. And it has an identity of being a son, of being a partner, of being a father, of being a mother, of being a gardener, of being a driver, identity of even being a human being. It's that deep because you see, the thought, any thought, even a single thought, and now people are so unaware that a series of thoughts go on. I'm saying even a single thought that comes to the mind happens because of the preservation of an identity. Now, why does the thought itself wants to preserve an identity which causes attachment? The thought is programmed in a way where initially it was all about survival. It had to keep thinking it to itself. The person had to keep thinking about what kept him alive. Because if you just play a game out of this, right, where you have n number of lives, you have endless lives, and one deep you and you keep getting killed again and again and again by the same animal. At one point, at one point, after dying for 1,000 times, you being the game, you will realize that this is not working well. Something different has to be done. That's when that particular person, you remembered that you need to have a deeper sense of the self, that you need to have more access to the information that kept you alive. That's when the whole identity happened. That's when you, in that 1001st attempt to not repeat those mistakes that killed you for the first 1000 times, where now you realize that something different has to be done, and you go back to that particular information and you retain it and you create an identity with it. And that's when you can keep getting better. That's when you have better equipments to keep yourself safe from that animal. And that's when the whole crisis of the I started. That's when the humanity came to a peak level where it could remember and it could pass on that information to other people. Because when can you pass an information to other people? It's only when you have yourself created that identity within yourself about something. Only then can you share it with another person. That's what happened in the initial times of the survival mode that we were in. Now, coming back to the world that we are in today, there are n number of identities. Even if you just take a laptop example, and just being on the social media, you have an identity. Just watching a YouTube, you have an identity. Just searching for information, you end up having an identity. Because information itself is identity. Any information that you read, it builds up an image in you about that particular information, because the thought itself is creating identities with each of those information. Now, if you have never learned, or if you have never dived into what attachment is, any information that you have in your life, any information that another person gives to you, becomes a kind of an attachment to you. It becomes an identity to you. And identity itself means attachment. Identity is not different from attachment. You have a role as a father, as a mother, as a son, an employee. All these are kind of identities, and these come with attachment if you're really unaware. There's another kind of way of living where you do all these things and you're not attached with them. At least not at the level that people are attached in today. And there's also another way to live where you're completely free of attachment. That's hard to do for a whole lot of people, where you have gone to the depths of the mind and you have realized that thinking itself is attachment. And you realized how the past and the future are just illusions of the present, of the mind itself, of and that the past and the future are illusions that are created by the thought itself. Where even when you remember something, that's again an illusion that is created by the thought. You need to remember things and you need identities to live in this world, definitely. But there's a way to live. There's a deep way to live where you're not identified with what you're remembering also. Because then you just go back to the information, fetch it, and just act on it. That's all. It's about it. Now what has happened is you go back, you remember, but at the right moment when you're remembering also, you get those feelings back. You remember that particular time in your past, and you remember those feelings, and you live in those with those feelings again. It is recreated. It is not something that just keeps um, that's happened once and not and doesn't happen again. It's something that the mind has to keep recreating to keep that kind of identity alive. And it's happening every moment, even it's happening right now in your life. Each and every thought that you think is kind of a repetition of the identity, because each and every thought reaffirms that particular identity within yourself. It could be any identity. And if you can observe, if you can really observe each and every thought, and if you can slow down your mind so much that you don't have to slow it down, all you have to do is have the observation of the mind itself. Because when you slowing the mind and you observing it are really no different. When you observe, and you can only observe the mind when you have slowed down, when you're in a hurry, when you're like when you're constantly in the habit of doing things quickly, your mind has to be like filled with all the thoughts, an n number of thoughts that are running like a bullet train. Because it's only when you slow down and only when you observe the mind that you will see that each thought that you think, and it is you who is thinking. It is not that the thought is happening to you. It's it's just that because you're so unaware that you're not able to see that you're the one thinking each and every thought. So because you're the one thinking each and every thought, and when you become aware of this, it becomes so obvious that you are the creator of all those thoughts. And when you become this aware, you'll see that every thought, each and every thought is of the past, and each and every thought is to reaffirm that particular identity and that particular attachment. It's being generated so that, and each thought has to be of the past. Each thought is there to reaffirm an identity within you. Now, the catch here is there's a way to live. There's also a way to live where a perception happens when there are no thoughts. Now, you must be so used to thinking that you would be thinking that thinking is the only way to know things, thinking is the only way to perceive things, but this is not the truth. That's why the whole of mankind is living in the illusions of the mind itself, because most of it is generated by the thought. And thought itself is a very material thing because it is of the brain. The brain generates those thoughts, and every time the brain generates the thoughts, it's kind of reconnecting, it is kind of re-establishing that particular pathway of the identity that you have. It's a very material thing, and it's a very individualistic identity and a reaffirmation of all the things that you believed in. And words are really limited when it comes to understanding this, where if you look at thinking, feeling, beliefs, ideas, all of this separately, you'll never understand what the mind is. If you just look at it, all of this as one, as just one, and all these are one entity, which keep happening, but you experience it as something that are individualistic because you have been told, and because there's been a lot of information about what each of these are, because we have definitions about words. And and as you are seeing now that because of all the divisions that are there in the understanding of all these particular aspects of the mind, and we're doing it very individualistically, we cannot ever live as one entity. If we never become aware of that the mind is one, and that you are one, that this whole life is one, and it's all functioning At the same time, you'll never understand that, and you'll never be able to even live as one human being. The thought is something that is there for reaffirming something of the past. And if you do not understand that each and every thought is a reaffirmation of an identity, and every thought is creating an attachment, and it is continuing that attachment, and it is continuing all those past attachments, even though they may not, those people may not be alive even now. It continues that particular attachment, it recreates that particular feeling in you, and you will never be free this way. That's what attachment is. Attachment is thought. Attachment is thinking about it again and again, and it recreates this every moment. To be free of attachment is to observe the mind itself. And to observe the mind, you have to first understand that thought is of the past. Thought is always of the past because it is based on time. And this is a way to look at life freely in the present, where you realize that there's no past, there's no future, there's just now. There's always now.